Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Turner. My guest tonight is Nicolas Ellis. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
We're here at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. If you don't know this store, you're not paying attention. It is the best bookstore in Saskatchewan, so we're thrilled to be here again for Music Talk at McNally. Welcome to Saskatoon, Nick.
Thank you.
You were just saying before we started that this is your first time on the Canadian prairies.
Exactly. Traveled to British Columbia, but never had the chance to do a trip in the prairies, so I'm very happy to finally have the opportunity to do it.
And here without snow. So that's the winner. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you're from Quebec, so you get snow.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, you just don't get the cold like we get.
Yeah, the wind.
Yeah. Even now, it's probably quite windy compared. Yeah. Tell us about yourself. This is your SSO debut, so we're thrilled to have you here this weekend. This is more than a year in the making because you were actually supposed to be with us last October.
Yeah.
And then, pandemic changed everything. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in Montreal right now. I work with the Orchestre Métropolitain and Yannick Nézet-Séguin as an artistic partner. So I conduct usually 2 programs every year and assist Yannick in his functions as the music director there. And I've also founded my own orchestra in Montreal, the Orchestre de l'Agora, which is at its 9th season this year. And it's a chamber orchestra, sometimes full-size symphonic that has many activities, but mostly has a social mission at its core. So we have all kinds of concerts in the community. And this year, actually, we're beginning a new series in a prison in the north of Montreal, where groups of 2-3 musicians go play for incarcerated men at the Prison de Bordeaux. And so and we have all kinds of other partnerships, educational partnerships, and also sometimes benefit events for humanitarian environmental organizations. So that's my baby, if I may say so, in Montreal.
Well, and it's a very cool project because I followed that project that you've been doing with L'Agora, and the idea of music as social justice is really fascinating to me. What was the instigation to start that? I understand young conductors wanting to start an orchestra, that makes sense, but then to make it about social justice was really intriguing.
Yeah, so when I was doing my undergrad in piano performance at the University of Montreal, I soon developed an interest in conducting and symphonic repertoire and started to bring friends together, organizing concerts. And we started they were all friends who also had the desire to share music to people who might not have much access to live classical music. Mm-hmm. And also just organizing some benefit events for Montreal-based humanitarian organizations. And then in 2012, what happened was in Quebec there was a student, in French we say une grève étudiante, a student strike, because the government of Quebec at the time wanted to raise tuition fees. And many students across the province protested against that. And so the Faculty of Music at the University of Montreal the students voted to go on strike. And so suddenly there were many music students who made the choice to not go to their lessons, but they still want to play their instrument, and they wanted to get involved socially in their community. And so for me at the time, it was, in a way, maybe the perfect, in French, le terrain parfait. It was like the perfect field, to organize, put on concerts with musicians who are wanted to be socially engaged, and also who had some free time suddenly. So I organized 2 big concerts during the student strike in Quebec in 2012, and they were concerts very intense, both artistically and humanly. And so right after that, I decided to make it a more permanent organization. And in 2013, I founded what is called today the Orchestre de l'Agora, that has this social mission. It's in its DNA, and we have all kinds of concerts in Montreal. Sometimes also have some tours in Quebec and a little bit in Ontario. So yeah, that's the project.
It's a fascinating project, and I think one of such value, because so many of us in the music community want to do more for the community, and sometimes there's a barrier just because of how arts organizations have run for generations. It's sometimes hard to think outside those building blocks of what we do. I think what you've done with the group is just incredible, because it does take. I saw some of your social media posts in the prison. You were just there recently, like this past week or something, and I thought, like, how incredible to be out living music in the community and using it as a not only a social justice, but like a dialogue of accessibility, because I think that is one of the things classical music struggles with, is accessibility. It's people love classical music once they have had a chance to hear classical music, and it's not accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and it's a win-win situation, because of course the people to whom we offer the music, they're very appreciative and they enjoy it very much. And also for the musicians, it's also a very moving and an interesting experience, because as artists, as musicians, we choose to do this for a living because we believe that music has this power to touch people and to move people, and of course in these situations it does. And so when people appreciate it and the musicians feel like people are open to the music and they receive it entirely, then musicians as well are more than happy to share it. So,
and I think what is so fascinating about that is I think that's probably where a lot of classical music has its actual roots.
Yeah,
we accidentally made it museum pieces in concert halls, but actually it has its roots in moving people at a personal and an accessible level.
I think so too. Yeah. At a time when there were so many amateur musicians at home, and composers wrote music for Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn wrote music specifically so that people could play at home and entertain themselves. So yeah, for sure, I think that even though composers like Haydn and Mozart did work for the aristocracy and they were at court, that being said, they did publish a lot of music that was really for the common person that is a music lover and is learning an instrument at home.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good springboard for this weekend's concert, because you are here to conduct a really great concert. In I think May of 2020, we were originally going to do a Beethoven festival, as every orchestra in the world was doing a Beethoven festival in 2020, and it all came to silence.
Yeah.
And hilariously, it was really great when we started to reconnect for this concert this fall and go, well, wait a minute, let's do some Beethoven. And so it is a bit of a Beethoven celebration of 251. Just a little on the off here, which works great. So let's dig into the music. For those of you watching at home, you can always ask questions through the live chat, and it comes straight through to my phone, and then I can actually ask.
Amazing.
I know, it's modern technology. It's fascinating. So this weekend we feature two really iconic works of Beethoven and a new work, but we'll get to that in a second. I want to start with the concerto. The Beethoven Concerto No. 3 is we're both pianists. We can admit the fact that 1 and 2 are like they're good and they're there, and but 3 is he's taken a step away from his desire to write concertos, and he's just written one of the great concertos of all time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it starts that way. I mean, you get the little introduction from the orchestra, sure, but then the pianist comes in, and it is clear that this is no longer a young man trying to write music. This is now a master.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing with this concerto is that he wrote it just after he wrote his Heiligenstadt Testament, which was a testament that he wrote in Heiligenstadt, which is a suburb of Vienna. And the doctors at the time, because he was starting to have much more serious problems with his deafness, and so they recommended, fresh air, go into the suburb, and it will do you good. And so, and he had already been, maybe for 6 years, feeling that his hearing problems was getting bigger and bigger. And when he was in Heiligenstadt, it was, kind of he just got completely sick of it, because he really realized that actually no doctor would be able to help him, and that he knew that it was going to get worse and worse. He would probably die of it. He didn't know, because nobody knew, or he would for sure become completely deaf. And so he writes this testament to his two brothers, which is basically a suicidal note, in which he says, he feels completely ashamed that the one sense that should be the strongest in him, compared to any normal person, human being, is actually being completely turned off. And so he feels a lot of shame. He feels, of course, a lot of frustration. And he doesn't really know how much he has to live, but he writes this testament, and he says, everything I have goes to you two, and I hope that you will be comprehensive of my bad temper. It was because of my hearing problems, and
sure.
all that. Yeah,
sure
right.
It was, yeah.
And but the testament finishes, and he says, he ends up saying that he will try to fight, and until his last breath, And so he comes back to Vienna. This is 1802 or 1803, and come back to Vienna with. It's a new person. It's a person that has to live with imminent death, that he doesn't know what will happen, and decides to go, give his heart, his soul, everything into music. And so so he writes the second symphony and the third piano concerto that we will be playing on Saturday night. And so we feel in this concerto the drama and this desire, to break grounds with the traditions of concerto writing of Mozart and Haydn just before him, and write really something where there's a bigger orchestration. There is, everything in the form is bigger, and it's more, in many ways, in some ways, more virtuoso as well. The writing for the piano. So it is a concerto, absolutely fascinating, and the second movement in E major is just maybe my favorite piece of music ever. It's so beautiful.
In that great tradition of Beethoven making his second movements hymn-like.
Yeah.
It is so reverent and peaceful. And when you think about the history of being at the Spa in Heiligenstadt, like there's all that pathos going into that, that we still feel today. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about the work, is that that first movement is just a bombastic show off, and then there is this deeply touching, intimate moment had with all these people on stage and all the people in the hall, who all of a sudden have this personal moment with Beethoven.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's a fascinating way to capture music, as he did in that moment, and then to have the third movement just run away with things.
Yeah, exactly. And as typical in Beethoven music, especially so in the music in C minor, because it's very fascinating how composers have relate to different keys. And I would say that Beethoven, for sure, C minor is he wrote some of his most his best music in C minor. The Fifth Symphony that we'll also be playing is in C minor. The Sonate Pathétique for piano is in C minor. The Seventh Sonata for violin and piano is in C minor. There's amazing. Some of his masterworks are all in C minor, and we feel all the drama that he wants to pour into this key and into this tonality. And so it's really Beethoven at its best, and at its who he truly is.
Yeah,
I
and
think.
if I recall, he gave the premiere of the piece, didn't he?
Yeah.
At the piano.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And funny thing is that because we tend to forget now, we have these beautiful scores, beautiful parts, perfectly printed, and everything is so clear, but the reality is that when he premiered his third piano concerto, and he premiered also other works, so because it was a custom at the time to do benefit concerts for yourself, so you invite all the people, the nobility, and you try to get money for yourself, because he was one of the first freelance musicians that ever existed. So he had to find ways, to subside financially, and so that was one way to organize benefit concerts. And so even the day of the performance, he was still finishing to write some parts, and there's even an anecdote of the page turner, because he was Beethoven was everything is so fresh, and he's conducting while playing, and so his part, according to the page turner, who was freaking out because all he could see, he saw a ghost score. That's what he saw, because actually there were just scribbles, that only Beethoven could understand. So actually the guy, he didn't even know when to turn the page. So Beethoven had to give him the signs every time so that he could change the page, because especially the piano part, nothing was written. So he was just, he knew it, that he knew by heart, but he had to also conduct, so he had the orchestra part as well. So anyways, it's
thankfully he did write it down later. So
yeah,
that's good.
Thankfully, but it does remind us that probably that performance, the premiere, he had to write it down for publishers, but then you think to yourself, there must have been some improvisation or many things, variations in, not because he didn't know, it's just that that's music just poured out.
Yeah, the publication of those things misses the spark of creation.
In a way,
in the moment that it was being created for the moment.
Yeah.
And now it's, you know what I mean? I mean, Beethoven 3 must be one of the most performed concertos there is. I can't imagine it would be in the top 10 for sure annually, and probably one of the most recorded in the top 10 for sure, because pretty much every pianist and with its worth their salt has recorded it at some point. We get to work this weekend with someone else making their SSO debut, and Jerry, who is a teenager from here in Saskatoon. We have the Cherniac Piano Concerto competition here in Saskatchewan. It takes place every 2 years, and we've had a number of winners, of course, from Saskatoon, but all the winners get to perform with us. And over the years, there's been some great winners. Guy Few, the trumpet player, pianist. Guy might have won it in both instruments. I don't remember. Alan Harrington, Thomas Yu. There's been some really phenomenal artists who have had their start there. Megan Malatz. You know Megan? Yeah, of course. She's in Montreal. Yes, Megan won it a few years ago. And so there's all these fantastic young musicians who get their start in that, and it wins them performances with the orchestras, and that's such an important moment for a young artist who wants to really dig into this repertoire, to get to play with an orchestra, because it's not the same thing as playing with an accompanist.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I have not met yet Jerry, but I'm very much looking forward to it, and I think I'm sure that it will be such a fun experience, of course, for the orchestra, who will be proud of a local musician who is extremely talented, and of course for Jerry, who will, it's just a different feeling when you have the orchestra that accompanies you, and it's in many ways for the inspiration, and even for the sound, when you produce the sound at the piano, and knowing that you have strings, you have woodwinds that all come together with you. It's fascinating, and this concerto also is much like most classical concertos. It's very much a dialogue, so it's really much the orchestra that announces the main themes, and then the piano answers, and they converse more closely, and then we're back to longer sections where it's just the orchestra, just the piano, and so it's very much like a conversation. So it'll be very fun.
Yeah, and the audience, I suspect most of Walter Murray will be there. So that's his school that he goes to.
Oh,
so
nice.
I suspect I know a lot of his friends and classmates there have been buying up tickets. So it's been really exciting to have that kind of energy in the room too. When it's that's one of the wonderful things about pianists and violinists. Often they are young, and they bring with them their young friends who are hearing these pieces for the first time.
Yeah.
So that's a part of the energy that's so great. You paired this, of course. Beethoven 5 is the major feature of the night, but you've paired it with this wonderful tonic between the two pieces. Because I remember as we were emailing back and forth about this concert, and we've got two Beethovens, and what do you put with Beethoven? Because concert programmers around the world struggle with that, because the wrong piece with Beethoven is just unexciting, uneventful, doesn't fit, feels out of place, wrecks the energy in the room. And I was really thrilled that you chose this great piece by Canadian composer Iman Habibi to be part of this performance, because if I recall, he actually wrote this as a compliment to Beethoven 5.
Exactly. So the title of the piece is Jeder Baum spricht. So every tree speaks. And it's an homage to Beethoven, to his Fifth Symphony, and it was really written to be played just before the symphony begins. And much like Beethoven, Iman uses a cell of 4 notes, ta 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 tam, and then he manipulates it like Beethoven does. In a much more, in a different sound universe, if I may say so, that is very proper to Iman, and throughout, and it's very interesting because you and then it goes from every section in the orchestra, and at some point all you hear is but they're all sharing this short motive that, of course, of 4 notes that we will hear when the symphony begins. That so it all connects so well. And a very interesting thing that Iman did in his piece is that first of all, the symphony is, when you think about it, it's sort of ambiguous because it starts with the notes G, 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 E flat. And so it's in C minor, but if you don't know what's coming next, you could think it's an E flat major, which is the major key relative to the C minor key. And so Iman, what he does is he finishes his piece with a B flat chord, suggesting, that we're going into E flat major. And so it makes, in my opinion, the surprise even bigger when you arrive in Beethoven's symphony, because then you still have this major feeling that you're going into an E flat major key, but actually, such as Beethoven wanted, he creates this surprise, and then you get into this very dramatic C minor music that everybody knows.
And I, from what I understand, we're doing it without applause between the two, which I think is wonderful.
Yes,
so that was the intention.
Yeah, I think
you finish and you go right in.
We dive
also,
right in.
What I like about Iman's piece is that it talks about it musically talks about, and he ruminated on the impact of climate change. This has been a big topic for us. We were just actually this week we're part of the global Uncertain Four Seasons project, and so we recorded it a few weeks ago, and our director of digital media, Simeon Taylor, put together a phenomenal visual experience. So you can head on over to concertstream.tv to view it, and it all plays as part of the World Climate Summit. I think on the 5th. On Friday, all 14 of the performances around the world are being aired and being available to all of the leaders at the event in Glasgow. And music music has always been used as dialogue and political statement. And climate change, I think, is one of the great forefronts of where music can actually spark a discussion, because we do get people talking, and we do make people think in a different way. And I think that's such a fascinating thing for him to be able to focus on in this piece of music, because nature meant a lot to Beethoven.
Absolutely.
Of course, there's the Pastoral Symphony, but like nature meant a lot to Beethoven in everything he did, and so being able to reference the potential loss of climate is an important musical moment here.
Absolutely, and there are countless of composers who have written their best music when they were surrounded by nature, in a small small cottage, and so for me, nature is part of music, and music is part of nature, and somehow it's very very special, but somehow it's a constant dialogue, and I'm not sure, Gustav Mahler would not have written most of his music if he was, or he would have written differently if he was in a different ecosystem or something like that.
Schubert, Brahms,
Schubert,
all those people would have changed.
Absolutely. So you can when you play this music, when you the Pastoral Symphony, or Brahms' Second Symphony, which is very pastoral like, it really just brings you in a state where you feel the trees, the birds, but more importantly, there is a serenity, or sometimes if there's a storm in the music, of course, then it's an absolutely different evocation. But it's music and nature have historically always been so close, and it makes perfect sense that Iman also gave this feeling, this touch to his piece, and to connect it like that with Beethoven's music. Of course, it makes so much sense, and we feel it for sure.
As you were saying, Beethoven 5 starts in a shocking way. Not only do we have that ambiguity of those opening famous four notes, but it then has a rest.
Yeah,
which is weird, and then you have the next statement with an extra long rest, and then he embarks on what is quite possibly one of the great achievements of mankind in terms of taking those four notes and manipulating them in ways that no one could have imagined before that moment. I often think about this piece, like how shocking it must have been to be there for the first performance.
Yeah,
right. Like this is the Vienna of Mozart and Haydn, and then all of a sudden, all that's thrown out the window, and we have this new concept that was so shocking.
Yeah, and actually, the first performance of that was really crazy, because as we were saying about the third piano concerto, which was played in a benefit event, once again, this symphony was played in another big, huge benefit event for Beethoven, in which he premiered the Fifth Symphony, the Sixth Symphony, the Fourth Piano Concerto, the Fantaisie Chorale for piano, orchestra, and choir, some opera arias. It was an endless
a perfido, wasn't it? Was that? Yeah.
And,
which is long. Like the whole show is long.
It was, it would just not finish, and it was a very crucial moment, because Beethoven had just been offered a job with Jérôme Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon Bonaparte, to become Kapellmeister, so chief of music, or in Kassel in Germany. And so he would leave Vienna, go to Germany, work for Jérôme Bonaparte, and but Vienna would not have it. So many people from the nobility got together, and they made this offer to Beethoven of an annually salary, where he was not even required to write a certain amount of works, but it was just a lot of money, so that he could fully dedicate his time to music. And so this concert, this first performance in which the Fifth Symphony appeared, it was really like an ultimatum, So it was really like either you take it or I leave, you know. So and we in many ways we can feel that in the music, this sort of, we can feel something very urgent, and something that it's, you feel when you play this music or when you listen to it, that he's grabbing the people in the audience like that, like listen to me, listen to this. And that's what makes it so compelling and so timeless in a way, because anyone who will hear this music in any time of music will always be feel gripped, so it's it is fascinating. That being said, apparently, because there was so much repertoire on that concert, the people say that it was not a very good
and supposedly quite under rehearsed.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And under rehearsed, and the shock of the musicians who discover this new music, and it makes me think. I assisted Fidelio, which is Beethoven's only opera, when in Paris a few weeks ago. So I was the assistant conductor, and it was performed by musicians who played on historical instruments. And so with gut strings and natural trumpet, natural horns with no piston, I forget how, you can change.
I used to play trumpet. This is how well I practice.
Not the valves.
The valves. The valves.
Yeah, okay. So, and I was speaking with musicians in the orchestra, and they were saying that, this music, Beethoven's music, it brings your instrument, at the edge of its capabilities, and when we play on modern instruments, sometimes we forget it, but it's always refreshing to remember that, all this writing, it brings you to the edge of what you can do. So
in the first movement of Symphony 5, he did push them to the edge, and it's insistent, like you said, it grips you right from the moment, because it doesn't let you go until this wonderful moment with the oboe. It's the oboe, right? That is such a strange, fascinating musical tension reliever, and yet sort of builds tension to what's about to happen, to continue the thought. I always think that it must be a whirlwind to conduct this piece, and particularly then to have to bring it down to that little moment.
Yeah, because the piece is in a way reckless. It never stops, and then suddenly, in the recapitulation, there is a sudden everybody stops playing, and then there's just this oboe that plays this very all alone and very simple ornamentation or small cadenza, and you feel like you don't understand what's going on, and then suddenly we dive right back in, and in that way Beethoven certainly had the sense for drama, to bring the audience in a place where they would not expect to go.
Yeah, so. Yeah, it's very high stage drama in that moment. Yeah, the second movement is a fun dance. It really is. It doesn't have the same recklessness to it, but it never lets go of that 4-note motive. That's just present throughout the whole work in so many different ways. Where do we hear it in the second movement?
Actually, the second movement is maybe the exception or the parenthesis in the symphony, because the 4-note motive, we have we hear it completely throughout the first movement, the third movement, and fourth movement, and then the second movement is like a theme and variation of the theme that is announced by the viola and the cello, and so it's exceptionally, in a way, Beethoven goes away from this 4-note motive and then takes a beautiful melody and creates variations. So in a way, it's kind of the same principle, where basically the 4-note motive is a variation throughout the piece. And in the second movement, it's more like a theme and variation. It's a different theme, but it's still in the spirit of having a material and finding different ways to develop it. And the funny thing, you said it's dance-like, but it's quite interesting because he wrote in the score andante con moto, so an andante with movement. But in one of his sketches because he was preparing this piece for 4 or 5 years before, he also wrote in one of his sketches quasi minuetto, so almost like a minuet. So this is certainly something that we try to keep in mind when we perform it, so that it has this elegance and this dance feel to it.
Yeah, it has a almost a little lilt, like minuets have.
Yeah.
You know, they have that little moment of lift, and you can feel that in the way he's trying to capture this music that you wouldn't imagine would be a minuet after the high drama of the first movement.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and now I'm gonna do a lot of speculation, but also because we talked about how financially what this concert meant, and having these sponsors really that were going to help Beethoven, and this meant having a stability financially meant that he could actually marry, because now he could actually propose to a woman, because before he could not really, because he wouldn't have been sure if he could support an eventual family and all that. So, but now he could, and to me, this second movement is maybe this is very speculation, but is maybe this optimistic, tenderness of finding, at last, because unfortunately Beethoven never really found
proposed to many women, and they all said no.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, but in a way you feel this optimism in this movement, and I think it's a very nice parenthesis throughout the whole drama that we have in first, third, and fourth movement.
Yeah. And it does take us into the drama of the third movement. Many years ago, when I was a young pianist studying all my RCM exams and things, the Beethoven 5 Symphony was, I think, on History 3, and I have for those of you who are like in music history, I have no idea what that is now, because they've changed all the grades, and now I pay no attention. But my teacher here in Saskatoon was Janet McGonigal, and she used to talk about how she heard tiptoeing elephants in the third movement, and I can't get that out of my head, and I hate to break that because people at home are gonna be like, oh, now that's what I'm gonna listen for. But it has this wonderful tiptoeing moments of the introduction, the hesitancy of the first statement of the third movement, and then comes in with the blast
horns.
of bump 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 bump, you know. And so I still see elephants. I'll try not to think of that too much this weekend. It's such a smack in the face after our little minuet.
Yeah, it's once again Beethoven creates this amazing tension with a very low melody played by cello and bass, and it's kind of almost snake-like. It's all legato written and slurred, and it moves, and you don't know really where it's going until there's this big appearance of the horns, and then suddenly we are somewhere else, and there's this middle section called the trio, so in which once again the cello and basses play this very I would say it's a very powerful lick, of eighth notes, and it's just incredible, all these different moods and this different tension and emotions that he's able to convey, and it's really a journey, for both musicians and the audience to go through this piece.
And it's a different type of drama than he gave us in that first movement, because in that first movement, we think of traditional theater drama where there's something serious happening, and it's holding the rapt attention of everyone in the room. All of a sudden, the drama is still big, but there's more light. I think, in that third movement. There you hear the turning from the minor to the major slowly but surely.
Yeah, and that's one of the most incredible things about this movement, is that it is completely connected to the fourth movement, and he creates this, and it's quite fascinating because, and especially for the timpani, because there's a point where the orchestra, these strings, they just play these very long notes that don't move, and then you just hear the timpani very soft, bum 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 bum, and he creates in the most masterful way a build-up where the whole orchestra just explodes into C major. So we were in this very dark C minor from the beginning, and then it just explodes in this very heroic and he I don't know how to say, like a victorious, finale, and the way he does it is still, you listen to it and you wonder
every time it's good.
Incredible.
Like every time it's good, and it's the throwing open of curtains in a dark room, and sunshine just floods the room, right? Like it's such an incredible musical moment as the third movement wanes and we start to hit the fourth, and that preparation of the dominant where you feel the push and pull, and then all of a sudden it's such a burst of joy. And he just it's such a memorable musical moment. And the opening of the symphony is almost it's so overused at this point, right? Like everybody knows those bum 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 bum, but the fourth movement is actually the moment in the symphony where I think the greatest emotions come for the audience, and probably for the conductor and musicians as well.
Yeah, well, there are many things to listen for in the fourth movement. First of all, in the instrumentation, there is suddenly a piccolo appears, a contrabassoon, which gives even the piccolo, which goes so high, and the contrabassoon that can go so low. It just widen up, the whole texture. And as if that was not enough, he adds trombones.
For the first time.
Yes.
Out of nowhere.
So usually trombones, they were used in opera for very, when the mean character comes in and you want something, darker and stronger. So it's the first time that trombones are used in a symphony. And they are used in a very dramatic way. And the trombones, what they offer is, even more sound, and they enhance the two horns that are there on stage and the two trumpets to something even bigger. So it's like the sound gets at the point where you think it can't go bigger. Well, now you have contrabassoon, piccolo, and three trombones that they do bring you.
It does. It really widens the colors.
Yeah, completely.
It's he's painting with more color than anybody had before. And we think of the famous use of trombone in the Mozart Requiem, but this is like this is a kid who's figured out how to really make the instruments do what they should be doing, and he just like you say, he paints with such sound.
Yeah, and it's thinking really a symphony as a dramatic piece, not it's because when Mozart wrote his symphonies, or Haydn, they were to be performed in the courtroom and sometimes to entertain guests and things like that. But this is a much more opera-like feature of the symphony. And funny enough, Beethoven is probably the composer that struggled the most to write an opera, because he only wrote one, and it took him 12 years, and even at the end he wasn't satisfied.
It's only okay.
But that being said, even though he wasn't as successful as he would have wanted in opera, you still feel this kind of opera drama feeling in his symphonies, and especially in the fifth. Yeah.
And like you were saying, Mozart, Haydn, they were writing for smaller rooms. For almost, there were times when their music was background noise. It was to be played as the court was taking their evening. Beethoven was not letting anyone let this be background noise.
No.
And for the rest of time, not just in that premiere, but for the rest of time. And I think that's must be one of the reasons why it's still one of the most important pieces of music today.
Absolutely. It had such an impact on the composers living at the time, and all the composers that followed, especially, of course, in the 19th century. And he had brought it such to a new level that, suddenly composers didn't want to write as many symphonies as Mozart or Haydn, because Mozart wrote 41 symphonies, Haydn wrote 104 symphonies, Beethoven wrote 9. So then 9 became, this kind of scary number where any composer after that would not want to write more than 9. And Brahms wrote 4, Schumann wrote 4 as well, Mendelssohn wrote 5. So you can see that it was suddenly a genre that was looked at with much more respect.
Yeah, exactly. And it also shows a growth in music. Like you say, we had these composers who were writing 104 symphonies. Haydn, I love Haydn. Some of them are very good.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of them are there. But it showed a shift in I think commitment or dedication in a different way, because all of a sudden, the days of just being paid by the court were disappearing. Those times were already fleeting when Beethoven was around, and so we see the other thing I also always find fascinating. This 1808, I think this is when 1808. You look at the musical history of 1808. There wasn't a lot of other great musical achievements outside of Beethoven's big concert that featured everything. There were, there weren't a lot of other landmark performances of new music at that time, so it's a bit fascinating that from some, and some of the composers from that time, Ferdinand Ries. Well, I mean, who plays his stuff? And so some of those composers just have been forgotten, and there stands Beethoven still with Beethoven 5 and 6 and the Fourth Concerto as some of the greatest music ever written.
Yeah,
and it still gets played all the time today because people still love it.
Yeah, and he did it. So this whole change, this shift in with court, and it all happened mostly because of the French Revolution. So. And the French, they marched in Vienna in 1804, if I remember correctly. And so Vienna was under the occupation, the French occupation. And suddenly there weren't, it was hard to host, organize, concerts and balls for for the people, because that was not what. So there was a complete shift in finding ways, and finding the money, to get commissions and write music, and so it's
and in a way, it's actually what we're sort of living through right now. In the musical world, particularly, I mean, in Canada, government funding has never been a sole source of income for arts organizations. But in Europe, for many years, a lot of orchestras relied on that, and that is slowly deteriorating. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the industry once again shifts as support, true financial support shifts from what had become comfortable.
Yeah, and. Well, it's interesting to make a parallel with, the patronage, of Beethoven, because essentially it's, individuals. One of I think it was the Archduke Rudolph. I think he was 21 years old, and he was pitching, a lot. Of course, he was from, he had some. He was from the aristocracy and had, some family money around him. But still, he still made the choice, to invest into Beethoven and make. Having this understanding that it's it's a cultural jewel, for Vienna society, and that we have to find a way to give him the best conditions to create write music. And in a way, things are still like that today. We're still trying to find ways, to finding supporters and people that believe into either into our individual artists or arts institutions. And in many ways, it's always been like that. It's in a certain way, it didn't really. It hasn't changed all that much. We still have to be like that. And in a way, Beethoven was a businessman. He did, he had an understanding of the financial milieu of the time, and still was able to, to confront sometimes some very high ranked, princes or dukes or even kings. So it's there's so many things, right, to learn from, not only musically but also how Beethoven managed through these circumstances to write music and find the financial support to go with it in a way.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple of questions that have now come in
Nice.
from online. So I'm going to ask them. So one of the questions that's come in is: do you have any advice for young artists, young conductors making their way onto the big stage for the first time? You've had a lot of debuts in the last few years. I've been following you for a few years, and every time I turn around, you're on a stage with someone new, which is wonderful. What is it like to be able to start making getting on bigger stages? How do young artists do that? That was a loaded question.
No, it's a good question. And in many ways, I'm still through that process because I'm still developing, new collaborations, new projects with orchestras and institutions with whom I haven't worked yet. Of course, it's as young conductors, we have to find a way to bring. At least for me, what happened to me, and every conductor has a different path, but what really happened to me was that I brought friends together and paid coffee and donuts during rehearsals. So starting
universal language of music, coffee and donuts. Yeah,
and
everywhere.
and then you build experience because there's so many diplomas that you can do in conducting, but truly, in my opinion, the best teacher is the orchestra, the musicians, because then at the break you ask questions: what was good, what was not good. Then as you also discover your own gestures and your own way to express, to relate in a physical way with the orchestra, which unfortunately a piano or a mirror or anything else will never give. Even in my opinion, even the best conducting teachers will never be able to really give you what you need until you actually do it with the musicians, and if it works or not, Yeah. So it's really finding a way to.
I once had a conductor that I knew describe learning to conduct as being the same as learning to water ski.
Water ski.
Because he said, he's like, you can have a teacher on shore. You're standing on the skis and they're telling you what's about to happen. But until the boat pulls away in the water and you get lifted forward, you don't know what that's going to feel like.
Yeah.
And he said it's that same moment on the podium where no matter how many times, like you say, with a mirror, with a piano, no matter how many times you try that out, it is not the same thing.
Exactly. And so really at the beginning, it's really, you have to create your own opportunities in a way. You have to go observe as much as possible other conductors in rehearsal, because I learned, at least for me, I learned a lot observing other conductors. You learn what works, what does not work, and you kind of have to decide that suddenly, even if you have never conducted in your life, you have to decide that you are a conductor, and but you do it with humility. You work with the musicians, and you ask them what they need. If you're a pianist, you ask the strings. Questions about bowings, anything. You ask horns, things about how you breathe, and all that has to be. So you kind of have to have the guts, to say I'm a conductor, but also you have to have the humility, to get the most out of the experience of orchestra musicians. Yeah.
One of the other questions that came in online is, what was the response of those in the prison to the music making that you were bringing to them?
So the thing that surprised me most was because I was a bit nervous, before the first concert. I didn't know if they would like it, if they would be, maybe they would not care, and all that. But what I realized is actually all these men are actually very vulnerable, and so they think that they're in a pattern where they will only have bad things happen to them in their life. And they don't think that something beautiful can come to them. And so having musicians come to them and say, you can have something beautiful in your life, and here we offer it to you. For some of the men, it was a very moving experience, and we saw, for some a few tears. And after the concerts, we have an exchange with the men that are there, and it's always up until now it's always been very appreciative, and yeah. So that was maybe the thing that marked me the most, is their vulnerability. That now that you think about it, it makes sense. But we have all these stereotypes of Netflix and other things that we watch of what it is like to a prison and prisoners, but yeah, and for most of them who think that they go through so much dark moments, to have kind of a shed of light go into them for 60 minutes, it's very very touching for them. Yeah.
Nick, thank you so much for being here this week. I'm so thrilled that you're here with the orchestra for your first performance with the SSO. You can join us online and in person this weekend. We have at TCU Place, of course, there's proof of vaccination required at the door for all events here in Saskatchewan, but also we have lots of distancing. We have lots of hand sanitizing. This is our 5th event without a single case or exposure, so we're very proud of the work we've been doing with not only the audience, but also the orchestra. And you can also, of course, join us online. You can watch the live stream anytime for the 24 hours with your digital ticket, or if you're an SSO streaming subscriber, you can watch it anytime you want over at concertstream.tv. Thank you so much. Have a great night, Saskatoon. We'll see you this weekend.
Thank you.